All right, shall we start off with the four immeasurables to correct our motivation? Right. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Okay, excellent. All right. Well, okay. So last week we spent a good bit of time talking about the faults of anger, which, many of them we know from our own experience, but also so there are both the visible faults of anger and also the invisible faults of anger. So we discussed both of those last week. Just one second. Okay. All right. So this week we're going to talk about try and nut out exactly what anger is so we can make sure we know it properly. We can identify it properly when it arises in our mind. We'll look at not just anger, but there's also other kind of derivatives or other awarenesses that are found within the domain of anger as well. So they really function pretty much in the same way as anger, cause the same problems as anger, maybe even worse problems than just base anger. So we'll look at those. And then we're going to look at a bit to like the assumptions that underlie our anger. So I think it's quite important to identify some of these assumptions that underlie our anger, because unless we really get a handle on what the thought process is that allows us or makes it so that we hold on to anger in our mind, then we're going to struggle to really eradicate it from our mind entirely, or really even get to a point of wanting to eradicate it entirely. So we'll look at that. And then we'll start looking at these four types of patients that the course is actually about. I mean, the four types of patients is what the course is about, but actually, unless you identify anger well and really understand all the problems that it brings each and every one of us, then you can study the tools of patience, but you won't have that real determination to put them into practice. So that's why it's so, so important to have that really solid grasp of, anger and all its faults and everything. So that's why we spend so much time usually when discussing patience. We spend so much time discussing anger. In fact, I've just been just coming to the end of 12 months of talking about patience from the Entry to the Middle Way, which is a text by Chandrakirti. And the third chapter is on patience. I mean, the whole text is actually like a teaching on emptiness. But as it goes through the chapters, there's also an emphasis that's placed on each of the six perfections that are practiced by bodhisattvas. So the third chapter is on patience. And yeah, we're coming to the end of it. And and I said to the class one day, I said, so what have we really been talking about for the last 12 months? And they said, anger. I was like, well, yes, I mean, we actually were talking about patience, but yes, you're right. We have spent an awful lot of time talking about anger. Yeah. Um, okay. So I thought I might just start off with a story to start with, because, sometimes it might feel like it's just us ordinary beings that don't have any kind of realizations or control over our mind that need to practice patience. But when you look at some of the stories of the great masters of the past, we also find stories of them and their real drive to practice patience. So some of you may have heard this story before, but it's such a beautiful story. I thought I'll tell it again, even if you've heard it before. So this is the story of Atisha, who is like one of the main figures in Tibetan Buddhism. Have you heard of Atisha before? Yeah, some? Okay, okay. So you probably know a bit about the story of Atisha. So Atisha was a great master, Indian master. And he, from a young age, he became a monk and he did a lot of studies under many amazing teachers in India. And he also had a close connection to the deity Tara, the Buddha Tara. And Tara, from time to time, it seems that he was able to have chats with Tara, go for a circumambulation around the stupa at Bodh Gaya, and Tara would turn up and give him some advice. So he came across Tara at one point, um, and he said, what's the really main practice for achieving enlightenment, achieving the state of a Buddha? And she said, well, the main practice is, of course, bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. And so Atisha went in search of getting, the best teachings he could on this. And he found that the best teachings that he could attain would be from a Lama actually who was living in Indonesia, Lama Selimpa. So he went on this long voyage to Indonesia. I think it took him maybe 13 months. And he spent 12 years studying under Lama Selimpa. And from that study, then we have like a particular system of how to develop bodhicitta, which is called the sevenfold cause and effect instruction, which is this beautiful method, step-by-step guide as to how to develop bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, which is like the main cause for attaining the state of a Buddha. So he spent the 12 years there with Selimpa, and then he traveled back to India and became the abbot at Nalanda Monastery. So in those days, I mean, this is back in the probably around the end of the 900s. So what's that? The end of the 10th century, beginning of the 11th century. And at that time, it was really the golden age of study at Nalanda University in India. So some of you may have been to the ruins of Nalanda University in India. And it's just, they're just ruins there now. There's nothing else. But at that time, at the time of Atisha, it was like one of the primary seats of monastic learning in Buddhist philosophy. And so many amazing masters have come out of Nalanda University. And so he was abbot there for quite some time. So at this point, then Buddhism had reached Tibet. So it had come to Tibet, I think, around the 8th century, I think. I'm not very good with dates, but with Pamasambhava, Shantarakshita, these kinds of masters. But there was some confusion as to how to practice everything in a correct way, in a clear way. And there was a Dharma king in Tibet at the time, Geshe, and he was really determined to make sure that Buddhism in Tibet was able to be practiced purely, cleanly, and correctly. And so he had the idea to invite a great master from India to come to Tibet and really help revive a clean practice of the Dharma. So he sent, I think, 21 of his students to India, who were students of Buddhism, to India to investigate who would be the best person to invite. So they went, and I think all but 2 of them died. And the 2 that did come back said, well, we've had a look around and we think the best person to invite would be Atisha. So Geshe was like, right, well, and just hearing the name Atisha, it's like brought this great sense of devotion to his mind. So he went about then collecting all the causes that really would be needed to invite Atisha to Tibet. So in those days, and also, well, these days as well, but it was considered that, in order to request teachings, really the best thing to do was to offer what is most precious to you. So what Geshe did, and there are many stories of lamas doing this is that he went to collect a great deal of gold. So it's not for the sake that a teacher would say, oh, I'm not going to teach you unless you give me gold. Not like that. It's from the side of the person requesting to offer what is most precious, because that is kind of like how you would regard the teachings that you're receiving. So Geshe went to collect gold that he could then take to India to present to Atisha and request him to come to Tibet. And while he was in the process of doing this, he was captured by one of the, I think it was the Mongol king, one of the Khans, and imprisoned. So his nephew, Jangchub, heard that he was imprisoned, and the Khan fellow had asked for a ransom for his release. And he said to Jangchub, if you want your uncle back, then you're going to have to give me his body weight in gold. So Jangchub went around to collect gold for the ransom for Geshe's release. And he managed to collect enough that it would be the weight of his body, but he couldn't get enough to also include his head. So he only had enough, he didn't have enough to pay the whole ransom. And he managed to talk to Geshe, and Geshe said to him, don't waste your money on me. I'm old. This is like, it's not important. I'll die soon. What's most important is that you invite Atisha to Tibet. So forget about me. Don't give any of this money to this terrible man who's holding me prisoner. Right? So use that gold that you've collected to go and invite Atisha to Tibet. So that's what Jangchub did. And Atisha agreed that he would come to Tibet. So when he came to Tibet, then he composed this amazing text that we now have many commentaries to, which is the Light for the Path to Enlightenment. So this was the root text that is like the foundation for all our Lam Rim texts that we now have. And at one point, he sent this text back to the abbot at Nalanda Monastery. And the monks at Nalanda, they looked at this text and they said, this is amazing. Like, he never wrote anything like this in India. So it's really due to the fact that he went to Tibet and did what he was asked to do in Tibet that we now have all these amazing Lam Rim teachings that give us that step-by-step, we don't have to nut it out for ourselves, give us this step-by-step process and map to follow to attain these amazing realizations and amazing capacity to benefit others. So that's the story of Atisha. So Atisha in Tibet, his main disciple was another great master called Drontompa, you've also probably heard of. He was a lay practitioner, in fact. And Drontompa, in his turn, had three main disciples. So one was Geshe Potar, one was Geshe Putua, and then one was Geshe Chengawa, who is the one who taught about these four types of patience that we're studying here. So another kind of like side story about Atisha is that the story goes that when he went from India to Tibet, he took his tea boy with him, who by all accounts was very irritating. And he did that because he was worried, having heard this amazing story of Geshe, who sacrificed himself for the sake of the Dharma, then he was worried that all the people in Tibet would be very gentle and he would have nobody that he could practice patience with respect to. So he's worried that, he wouldn't have any irritating people to come across. And so the way that the Tibetans tell it is that when he got to Tibet, so because he'd taken this irritating tea boy with him so he could practice patience, and the story goes that when he got to Tibet, he realized that he needn't have worried. So he had plenty of opportunities in Tibet, it would seem. So even these great masters, this is somebody who was already abbot of Nalanda Monastery. He developed a great practice of the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, from his studies with Selingpa, and yet still he was searching out those people that he could practice and develop and increase his patience with respect to. Not like us. I mean, we try and avoid we try and avoid all those people, don't we? But this is what these great masters do: is they actually seek them out. They'll take them with them. They won't want to be separated from them. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a bit about anger, really, to try and nut out exactly what is anger. So if you bring to mind an angry person, what comes to mind to you?
A red face,
A
red
red
or purple
face?
face.
Yeah, yeah, somebody's gone red in the face. Anything else?
Out of control.
Out of control? Yeah. Lashing out?
Someone who's always looking for trouble and anger in others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Looking for drama?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else?
How about loud and overpowering speech and conversation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Loud and overpowering speech, maybe harsh speech, unkind speech, perhaps even.
Sometimes you see people that are they're what they're saying is very manipulative, and they're not loud, and they're not overt. Like if you took a picture and they wouldn't look overtly angry, but they will say things. My mother would refer to it as the iron fist and the velvet glove, where they kind of slap you and you wouldn't quite know until a little bit later that they just nailed you, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is like a sort of, it's a, what can we say? It's almost like a hidden anger in a sense, isn't it? It's probably not the first image that will come to mind when you think of an angry person, but also, so this is a really good point that you've brought up there. So, for the most part, when you first think of an angry person, this is like really what comes to mind. Somebody who's gone red in the face, who's like, shouting at other people or speaking really harshly, who maybe is on the verge of, throwing a fist or two. So that's what really comes to mind when we think of an angry person. So it's possible that we might have in our minds the idea that, well, I'm not too angry. I don't get angry that often. Because if that's the idea of what anger is in our own mind, then yeah, probably we don't get to that like uncontrolled level very often, like completely where our speech and our body is just like, out of control entirely. Yeah. So we might not have that kind of a level, but that's not to say we don't still have anger. So let's have a look at the definition of anger. So this is Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy is like really into definitions and stuff. Hang on, let me just bring that up. All right, just 1 second. Had the file right there. All right, can you see that okay? All right. So the reason why Buddhist philosophy is so intent on definitions, merely defining a thing, is because we want to make sure that we accurately assess the thing is that we're trying to eradicate from our mind. So it's like, for instance, if somebody is a surgeon and maybe they're a brain surgeon and they're going to go in and remove a tumor from the brain. So when you're going in as a brain surgeon to remove the tumor from the brain, you need to accurately identify the boundaries of that tumor. Because if you don't take enough of the tumor, then you leave some behind and it can regrow. Or if, for instance, you take too much out, you end up taking out healthy brain tissue as well. And that can also negatively impact on the person that you're operating on so that they don't have good function in other respects. So for anger here then, so anger is very much tied up with a displeasure, right, isn't it? So anger is not displeasure, but it's tied up with displeasure. So usually with anger, you've identified something that is like not good in some respect. So when we're removing the anger, together with that, you've identified something that is not good. Maybe it's just not good for you. It might be not good for a lot of people, whatever the case is. Now, when we want to remove or subdue and then eventually remove our anger, we want to make sure that we subdue and remove just the anger. We don't want to remove our ability to discriminate right from wrong. What is good behavior? What is bad behavior? Right? So that's why these definitions are so important. So for anger, then the definition that we have here is it's an ill will that upon observing the three objects of anger, or three objects of observation of anger, cannot tolerate them and wishes to harm them. So there are a few points that we can pull out from this definition. So for starters, it says it's an ill will. So it's a consciousness, isn't it? For starters, anger is necessarily a consciousness. So it's not a physical action, it's not a verbal action, it's a consciousness within our own mind. It's a mental consciousness. So it's an ill will meaning ill intent, wish to harm. It observes particular objects of observation. So these would be suffering, sentient beings, and also the sources for suffering. So our main one that we're really going to focus on is anger in relation to sentient beings, because this is really probably where we have the most problems with our anger currently. You know, it's kind of like the biggest issue for us. So those are the three objects of observation of anger. Then it says it cannot tolerate them and wishes to harm them. So that ill will relates to the wishing to harm. Cannot tolerate them. So this is an important point, right? So cannot tolerate them or unable to bear them. Patience, on the other hand, is a consciousness that is able to bear these difficulties, whether it be sentient beings who are harming us, suffering, or the sources of suffering. So being unable to bear something is, in this case, what ends up pushing us to wanting to harm that object. So what we're going to be trying to do is to build up our ability to tolerate or to bear difficult circumstance. And when I say able to bear, I don't mean able to bear in the sense of like, you really hate it, you really would like to give harm to that person, but you're going to grit your teeth and you're not going to say something in return. You're not going to hit them, right? I don't mean that kind of thing. The ability to bear, the toleration, comes from actually properly understanding, developing our wisdom of how we exist, of how other sentient beings exist, and through developing things like our loving kindness and compassion. So on that basis, then we'll be able to tolerate a great deal more in terms of difficulties that come our way without resorting to anger. It doesn't mean that being able to bear or able to tolerate something doesn't mean that therefore you can't do anything about that difficult situation, right? This is not the meaning. Being able to bear means for our mind to not become disturbed. So, and who doesn't want that, right? If someone behaves badly towards you, you want your mind to not be disturbed. It doesn't mean you can't do something to stop the bad behavior. Being able to bear really is talking about what you're doing on a mental level. So it's a really important distinction to make for these two. Yeah. So when we look at this definition of anger, then you can say for sure, yeah, it includes when you think of that classic example of somebody who's angry, you know, and you can see from the outward manifestation of them that they've got that internal anger happening, right? So for somebody who's like, you know, really angry and their face has gone red or purple and they're spouting, you know, bad words and they're maybe on the verge of hitting somebody, you can see clearly that there is something going on in their mind that is causing them to want to harm others around them, right? So you can see clearly there. But then, as Karen was saying, right, we've got other types of other levels of anger which don't necessarily have that outward clear manifestation. Yeah. So you could potentially you could yourself, or there could be somebody around you who is smiling, who actually speaks quite nicely, who is, you know, even perhaps appears to be a friend to you. But actually what they're doing is they're undermining you. Or there's some manipulation going on. So it doesn't look like the classic example of anger, but it fits the definition, doesn't it? You know, if you're wanting to harm another person, there's something that you can't quite bear about that other person. Maybe they've got something that you want, or maybe you feel that they've harmed you in some way in the past. And so you don't go about harming them in return through these very obvious violent means. You go through using subtler means to do that. Yeah. So when we talk about identifying anger, the main point is to identify it within our own mind, really. You know, we can't really tell if another person is angry or not by looking at their physical or verbal behavior. We can have a guess, but we can't absolutely tell. The most important thing really is to identify all these different levels of anger within our own mind. That's the most important thing. Do you have any questions about this definition or what we've talked about so far?
I have
Cynthia?
a question.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, was there someone else?
I saw Cynthia's hand go up, but I just, because I can't see all of your faces at the one go. So was that Susan who was?
Yeah. I have a
Okay.
question. What does it mean? Object of observation of anger. I'm trying to get that conceptualized. Are objects of observation of anger? Do they mean
Yeah.
objects of anger?
Yeah, it's the object that you're focused on. So yeah, it's a bit of a technical way to present it. So when we talk about consciousnesses, so we've got, for instance, the sense consciousnesses. So many of you will probably be familiar with this presentation of consciousness from the Buddhist perspective. So we've got sense consciousnesses like eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and they all apprehend the objects of the senses. So any consciousness that exists has an object that it apprehends, that it knows. So for instance, an eye consciousness, when your eye consciousness looks at, I've got a white cup here, so my eye consciousness looks at the white cup, then the object of my eye consciousness is the white cup itself. That's the object of observation of my eye consciousness. You say it's the object that, the thing that my eye consciousness is focused on when I look at it. Or when I'm looking at the computer, then we can say that the computer is that object of observation of my eye consciousness. So every consciousness will have its own particular object that it is attending to. So with ear consciousness, the objects of observation for ear consciousness, or the objects that they're focused on, that they're attending to, will be sounds. And for nose consciousness, it will be smells. For tongue consciousness, there'll be tastes. And for body consciousness, it will be tactile objects. So, you know, rough, smooth, heavy, all of those kind of tactile sensations will be the main objects of those consciousnesses. Then on top of those sense consciousnesses, we also have the mental consciousness. So this is the one for us that does all of the thinking. So when we just think about stuff, then that is our mental consciousness that is operating. So maybe we're turning over in our mind, what does this definition actually mean? What does object of observation mean? All that is going on. We've seen the words with our eyes, so the eye consciousness focused on the words, but then the thing that really, turns over the meaning is our mental consciousness. So the mental consciousness kind of pulls in all that sensory information that we get through our sense consciousnesses and compiles it, and then gives us a way in which we can, we ourselves as people are able to, what could we say, know the world, I guess, in a combined sense. So the mental consciousness really brings it all together and allows us to be able to think over all that sensory input that we've gained. So in this case, our anger is a mental consciousness. So anger is not going to be an eye consciousness, an ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness. Anger is necessarily a mental consciousness. So it's one of these thinking types of consciousness. And so its object will be an object that is related to the harm that's being done to us or the difficulty that has befallen us. So in this case, it talks about the three objects of observation, or the three things that anger might be focused on. The main one for us to focus on is sentient beings, sentient beings who do us harm. But also you can have anger that's focused on suffering, and you can have anger that's focused on sources of suffering. So sources of suffering would be things like, say you put your hand on a rose bush and there was a thorn there and it pricked your finger. So that thorn could be considered a source of suffering in this case. It might be something that you would get angry towards. But these are like smaller things, like the ones that we have the most difficulty with, really, for us, like the big ticket objects of anger, sentient beings. And sentient beings are like highly unpredictable, really quite out of control, and they'll give us problems wherever we go, really. So there's this quote by Shantideva, I can't remember the exact way it's mentioned in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, but it's something along the lines of, it's impossible to coat the entire surface of the world with leather. So because when you walk on the earth, if you've got bare feet, then it's quite uncomfortable, isn't it? So there's like you're going to get stones that are poking to the soles of your feet, and there'll be thorns and all sorts of stuff. So you get all sorts of suffering walking barefoot across the earth. So it's impossible to cover the entire surface of the earth with leather so that you don't have to experience that kind of suffering. But what you can do is you can cover the soles of your feet with leather. That's like, gives you the same benefit as covering the entirety of the surface of the earth. So that wherever you walk, then there might be thorns, there might be stones, there might be, all manner of difficulties, but it won't cause you that suffering because you've covered the soles of your feet. So likewise, he says in the practice of patience, it's impossible to stop all external enemies, right? So it's impossible to stop sentient beings from behaving in difficult ways, in problematic ways, in ways that seek to harm us. But what we can do is we can protect our own mind with patience so that whatever barbs come our way from sentient beings, then it doesn't affect our minds. So patience is essentially like wearing shoes, because sentient beings are like unruly. We'll never be able to subdue them all. But what we can do is we can make it's like essentially it accomplishes the same purpose by practicing patience. It's like putting on shoes as we go around all the unruly beings of the world. So that's what it means by objects of observation. So it's the thing that anger is focused on. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you for explaining it. That really helped.
Great. Okay. And Cynthia, did you have a question?
Yes, Venerable, thank you. Yeah, I just have a clarification maybe when it says wishes to harm them. So I understand sometimes there's the subtle wish to harm. So I'm just wondering, is that from a definition from a karma perspective? So for example, like, so sometimes like if, like there's irritation, right? So you're irritated with a person. I know that's a form of anger, but at least in my mind, I don't have a wish to harm in the way it seems to say it here. So I'm just wondering, is that just from, well, there's two things. One is it from the side of the person who's being angry, whether or not it has the real effect of harming somebody? Meaning, it can be mental, like that I don't recognize. For example, you ignore the person, right? Like you said, like, or you kind of not talk to somebody. Is that kind of what that, I just want to clarify, is that just from a karmic perspective? Or that if I don't wish to harm, therefore I'm not angry? I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, if you don't have the wish to harm, then you wouldn't have anger in your mind. So that anger necessarily involves ill will or the intention to harm. Yeah, so definitely it's the case. Whether you have ill will in your mind or not, that really is something we each have to investigate for ourselves. Sometimes it's the case that we haven't yet identified these really subtler levels of ill will in our own mind. For instance, like if somebody harms us and our response to that is to ignore the person, the question is that are we just ignoring the person, but our mind has not become at all disturbed? Or is it the case that we're hoping that our silence to this person will in some way actually cause them some suffering? Do you know what I mean? It's like that sort of passive aggressive approach where it's like, well, I'm just not going to speak to that person. But underneath that, there is this feeling of like, or this sense of, and I hope that kind of harms them in some way. It might not be a really big intent to harm, but still there can be that subtle intention to harm underlying that ignoring of the person. So the only way we can really tell whether we have anger or that intention to harm within our own mind is by investigating those motivations within our own mind. The best way to make sure that we don't have the intention to harm in our mind is to generate an intention to benefit. So we replace ill will with goodwill. So as long as we have goodwill or intention to benefit towards a person, then that intention to harm won't be able to sit in our mind with respect to that person. So this is another thing where the objects of observation actually comes up again. So here we say that anger has these particular objects of observation. So let's pick a sentient being. So a sentient being that has spoken rudely towards us, right? So when a sentient being speaks rudely towards us, then the anger is focused on that sentient being who's spoken so rudely. And the anger will be like, well, what it will do is it'll make you think, well, I am going to speak rudely back to them because that will make things better. Right? That's kind of what anger is telling you, isn't it? It's like somehow, we'll look into this in a minute when we talk about the assumptions underlying anger, but this is kind of what happens. We don't think through it logically, we don't think through it in a really conscious way, but there's this like natural assumption that we have that things will get better if I retaliate with the same kind of harm that was shown to me. So there is that intention to harm, I want to do some harm to that person. And on that basis, I'm going to speak rudely to that person. So as long as we have that intention to harm towards that person, then we'll have anger remaining in our mind. Whether we actually manage to say something or not, whether we have the opportunity to say something, whether we say something and the person suffers or not. Sometimes you can be talking to somebody who can be quite oblivious to the meaning of what you're saying, right? I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a monk, and and somebody, it was like after class one day, we'd all been studying together, and I could tell that one of the other people in the class was a bit annoyed with him, and sort of walked off in a bit of a huff after class, and you could see it was directed towards this monk. And I said to him, "Oh, well, she's clearly like not happy with you." And he said, "Really? I didn't notice." He's like just completely passed him by that this other person was trying to do some harm to him in some, small way. So sometimes it might be the case that you actually say something where you have the intention that it's going to harm this person, but in actual fact, because they're oblivious to it, or, they just haven't paid attention, you don't actually manage to do any harm to them in a temporary sense. But still, you've had the anger in your mind. So even if you haven't harmed the other person, you've already harmed yourself. Yeah. So as long as we have that anger, that intention to harm in our mind, in that case, whether we've actually managed to see through the action of doing the harm and actually causing harm, we still have the anger. If we're able to replace through training, like this takes some work, but it's doable, totally doable. If we manage to replace that intention to harm towards that particular object, that person who spoke rudely to us, with instead an intention to benefit, goodwill, which is loving kindness, then the anger can't come in and focus on that person, because these two ways of approaching that one object are like opposite. So on the one hand, we've got ill will and intention to harm. On the other hand, we've got goodwill and intention to benefit. So as long as the intention to benefit sits there in our mind towards that object, then there is no seat, there's no place for anger to sit there and focus on that object as well. So that's the best way to make sure that we don't have that anger sitting in our mind. Yeah. So this is the way that consciousness works, actually. It's one of the great qualities of consciousness, is that if you have an unhelpful, harmful type of consciousness in your mind, if you train your mind in the opposing way of thinking, then your mind becomes more familiar with that opposing positive way of thinking. Then the harmful consciousnesses can't remain as long as you've got those positive ones there, because they're focused on the same object, but they have opposite ways of thinking about that object. So when you have the one, you can't have the other. When you have the other, you can't have the one. Yeah. So I'd say it's not just in terms of a karmic presentation. This is like a presentation of the way that consciousness works, essentially. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So the other thing also to consider is in our minds is in terms of anger and identifying whether it is actually anger in our minds or not, is it anger? Has the intention to harm actually arisen? And, we've just discussed there are levels of subtlety of that intention to harm. Or is it the case that I'm just upset or I'm displeased? So being upset or displeasure, that's not anger in and of itself. What it is, though, is Shantideva says it's the fuel for anger. So being upset, being displeased, this is also something that we really want to try and turn around. And this comes within that framework of learning how to bear, or learning how to tolerate difficult circumstances, because that will help to take the power out and remove the displeasure or being upset. Because displeasure and being upset very quickly fall over into anger. It doesn't take very long in our mind. So that's the other thing to really check out in our own mind is it displeasure, or is it already, gone over into anger, that intention to harm? Yeah. Any other questions about what we've looked at so far? No. Okay, so it's all clear. I'm going to take that as meaning. I hope so. Okay, so we also usually have a function when it comes to these explanations of the definitions. So functions, here it says acts as a support for not abiding in contact. So this means in contact with happiness. So this is one of the big things that anger does for us, is it takes our happiness away. It takes our happiness away in the short term, so immediately, in terms of the happiness of our mind, pulls it away entirely. It also creates more problems in our life. So we have, less causes for happiness in our life. And also it takes away our causes for happiness in future lifetimes as well. So it makes us, what it ends up doing is that it makes us meet with suffering in this life. And it also creates the causes for meeting suffering in future lives too. You remember we talked last week about that whole process of, so you start with ignorance and then you go, you might develop anger, and on the basis of anger, then you might do some physical or verbal action, which places a seed, which is the cause for then experiencing a negative result of suffering in a future life as well. So that's one of those invisible faults of anger. And that's what, one of the reasons why it acts as a support for not abiding in contact. And also it acts as a support for misconduct. So for further negative actions. That's clear because we all know how easy it is to just for like negative words, rude words, harsh words to come out of our mouths when we're angry. Also, if anger intensifies, we can even get to the point where we use our bodies to lash out physically as well. So, yeah. Okay. So this is just the baseline anger. Now there's more. All right. So in addition to, so anger's got a lot of faults, right? This is the fundamental type anger business, but we can take it further. And there are these other ones that also fit within the domain of anger. So these are called secondary afflictions. So it's good to identify all of these, and then we, see the full gamut of stuff and how much problem it creates in our mind. And then we just seek to work at reducing it, and eventually eliminating it entirely. So this next one, which is a related one, is called wrath. Sometimes you might even be able to call it aggression, perhaps. But so it's like anger in that it's an ill will, wishes to harm. But it does that through wanting to strike or some kind of physical action when any of the 9 bases of malice abide nearby. Don't worry too much about the 9 bases of malice because I think we don't have time to cover all the details. But basically, it's talking about, like anybody who seeks to harm you, whether it be in the past, present, or the future, anybody who seeks to harm your close ones in the past, present, and future, and anybody who seeks to benefit your enemies in the past, present, and future. These are the objects or the focuses of wrath. So in focusing on those objects, then wrath is it's like an intensification of anger, so that you've now gotten to the point where you're getting ready to physically strike. So as it says here, it acts as a function for taking up weapons, punishing, and so forth, preparing to injure others. So you're actually, you're making those preparations to do some kind of physical damage to another being. So that's wrath. So I think that possibly this is one of the kind of classic images that come to mind when we think of an angry person. actually we're more thinking of a wrathful person. Yeah. But anger doesn't necessarily have to involve this, right? So this is an intensification of anger. Anger, just as a baseline thing, which is already doing all of that harmful stuff to ourselves and will do harmful stuff to others. So that's just really this intention to harm through this being unable to bear the situation. Yeah. So we have wrath. Then we also have, next one, resentment. So we're all probably fairly familiar with resentment in our own mind, even if we haven't yet read the definition. But yeah. So here we've got the definition as a mind that, refusing to let go of a continuum of anger, wishes to harm or retaliate. So it's having initially gotten angry, and then you have this ongoing just wish to harm that's sitting in your mind. Like, it's also very much involved in that rumination process. So when you have some difficulty at work, for instance, one of your colleagues has made your life difficult, maybe they've said some bad stuff to you, about you, to other colleagues and so forth. So you might not have actually said something bad back to them, trying to harm them, but already in your mind, you've developed that intention to harm. Then you've gone home and you've maintained that intention to harm, and you start to think about all the ways that you can harm them back. And that can go on, like for ages. We can hold on to resentment for years and years. It might not always be like fully present in our mind, but when we have that resentment, so there's still that ill will towards the focus of your anger you've maintained that over a long period of time. And so you've maintained that intention to harm over a long period of time. It's really detrimental. It's so detrimental to our mind. It's so detrimental in terms of like our relationships with others as well, that inability to let go. Yeah, and we're constantly creating then as well, if you think of it from a karmic perspective, those causes for future suffering in future lifetimes through that continued intention to harm. Yeah. Sometimes when you think about it, it's like, and you can think about those times when you yourself have held on to that resentment, or maybe there's even a resentment that you still have in your mind today, or that you can easily bring up if you just think about the focus of your resentment. And sometimes I think it's helpful to think, what would it be like? What would my mind be like if I just could let it go, if it no longer existed in my mind? Like, what actual difference would that make to me? What is the benefit to my mind of holding on to this resentment? What is it actually doing to help me? It doesn't do anything to help us. It doesn't help us to come up with a good response to the harm that's being done. It doesn't stop the harm that's already been done. In fact, what it probably does is cloud us so that we have less of an ability to respond in a positive way, in a way that might actually improve the situation. And it leaves us with this ongoing kind of like, it's almost like a grittiness of the mind, a discomfort of the mind that just sits there and sits there. So if that was not there, how free would your mind be? Like, it would be pretty nice, wouldn't it, if you could just let go of these resentments? If your mind was filled with kindness and love instead. I mean, it would be so much, but I think it's really a good thing to think about, like, what would my mind be like to get, I think I mentioned this last week, right, is to really get a sense of the goal that we're aiming for. If you have an idea of what it might be like, just build up an idea of what it might be like to not have resentment going on in your mind, to not have anger going on in your mind. And then you kind of get a sense of, that is what I want. That's what I really want. And it will give you some kind of like determination to try and get there. So I think it is a good thing to add into our practice. sort of, it's like visualizing what your mind would be like. I mean, it's not like a visual thing, because obviously having a mind that is free of anger is not really a visual thing. It's more sort of like an experiential idea. So having that, but it's like we'd say, it's sort of like a visualization of what it might be like, and then striving towards that, seeing that it's possible and striving towards it. Okay, so that's for resentment. And then spite. There's more. They just keep coming. So spite. This one it's similar to wrath in the sense that it goes with particular actions, but spite here is actually to do with speech. So harming through speech. So here it says it's an awareness which, for instance, lacking thoughts of regret and admission when another points out one's faults, wishes to utter harsh speech out of hateful thoughts driven by wrath and resentment. Yeah. So it's that desire to harm through harsh speech, essentially. That's what it comes down to. And this is something that we probably encounter quite a lot in our lives. You know, it probably happens without us even noticing it. And we've said something before we've even really thought about it. Yeah. And then the final one we have here, which is just plain old harmfulness, which is it's a wish bereft of benevolence or compassion to harm sentient beings. So it's just plain old ill will. So all of these we want to take off the board. This is our aim with patience. Yeah. Okay, so any questions so far? Cynthia?
Yeah, I just have just a quick thing. So for someone who seems like their state of mind is always angry, what would that be? Is that the first category, which is just anger, or it seems like the moment they wake up, they're all just angry? What would that be? Is that just because it's been a habit of them and it's just there? Yeah.
Probably through strong conditioning. Yeah, so we all have that propensity towards anger within our mind. You know, we know that because when we encounter the conditions like somebody who does harm to us and so forth, then our anger just like straight away pops up in our mind. So that comes from this propensity, or we could even say like a seed within our mind for anger. The seed just being like basically a potential or a propensity for anger. So yeah, through great familiarity, whether it's in past lives or in this life, then that propensity can really grow in strength, so that it's almost like it's constantly bearing this fruit of anger throughout a person's life. So this is also one of the dangers of if we allow anger to remain in our own mind, because realistically there's not much that we can do for other people's minds with the capacity that we currently have. Our main ability to do something is in relation to our own mind. So what we need to make sure is that we don't allow our own anger to fester on in our mind without trying to confront it, because what we're then doing is really increasing the strength of that propensity for anger ourselves, so that it will become easier for us to get angry, you know, the more and more we do it. So not just in this life, but also in future lifetimes as well. So we want to try and reduce that propensity also for that reason. So de-habituate ourselves, defamiliarize ourselves out of the anger, and familiarize ourselves with the opposite, which is loving kindness and compassion. Yeah. So sometimes it's from past lives, but also you can have the conditioning from this life. So from this life, because we all have that propensity for anger, it can be the case that we meet with certain conditions in this life that make it so we have this more tendency towards anger. Perhaps we've come across people early in life who have even said to us, oh, it's good to be angry. You know, you should be angry. If people harm you, anger is good. And so having met that condition in this lifetime, then you allow anger to remain in your mind. Whereas other people from a young age, they might grow up around others who say, actually, no, anger is not a good thing. Anger is harmful to yourself. Anger is harmful towards others. And because they've met those conditions in this life, then they've done something to try and reduce their anger. They've at least been able to identify that it's an unhelpful type of state awareness. Yeah. Okay, so I will stop that share. Ready. So I'm just having an issue with my Wi-Fi. I'm just going to change over my internet. If I drop out, I will log back in straight away. So let's see. Okay, you can hear me okay? It's all right? Ah, that worked. All right, perfect. Okay. All right, so the next, let's see, how much time do we have? 25 minutes, all right. So just briefly, what we're going to do now is we are going to have think, like I said, about what are the assumptions underlying our anger. So we're just going to list them down for starters, and then we'll come back to them later on down the track, maybe next week or the week after. So if you think about it from your own perspective, just bring up. What are some of the assumptions that underlie your own development of anger? So I think it's good to think about it from a personal perspective rather than me just saying, well, there's this assumption, that assumption, the other assumption. You know, I'd like to hear what your ideas are as to like what assumptions support your anger.
Someone wishing to harm us.
Someone wishing to harm us. So what would be the assumption that goes like that's a condition, but what would be the assumption like somebody wishes to harm you, so why would you therefore get angry in response?
To protect yourself.
Ah, okay. So I think this is a big one. It protects me. Okay. Any other assumptions?
Muffin.
Somebody has it out for you. Like that person has it out for me. Assuming that rather than, I mean, maybe they don't at all. And maybe they just are having their own problems and somehow you're misinterpreting, we're misinterpreting that. But nevertheless, feeling that person is intentionally trying to get at me.
So that person is intentionally harming me. Okay, yep, another good one. Karen, did you have one?
Yeah, I was just thinking so often in the current political climate, it's that sense of, well, I'm angry, it's righteous indignation. I mean, we're seeing a wrong, and so it's okay if I'm angry because I'm angry for the right reasons and not, and if I'm not interested in hitting someone with a bat, that's okay. So
Okay, so what would be the assumption would be, so one of the assumptions I think that what you're saying is that the assumption is that I'm right. Wouldn't it be? Also, what would be another assumption that goes with that?
that the greater good is worth it by going out and holding a sign and peacefully protesting that we're fighting a bigger issue of sort of that if a wrong is going on, that it's okay to be right, to be angry if it's something that we feel is morally wrong or morally repugnant or something.
So maybe it helps to overcome injustices. Would that be a good way of saying it?
Yep.
Okay, any other ideas?
So the corollary to number 3 is the other person is wrong.
The other person is wrong. Yep. Yeah. Jay?
The other thing is, for me, anger energizes, motivates. That's, connected. Yeah.
Gives me energy. Would you say it gives me energy to overcome the issue, the difficult circumstance, or it just gives me energy?
No, to overcome. It's something that, can motivate me.
Okay, take
Yeah.
advantage, overcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other ones?
Protecting what's important to us.
Okay, so it helps me protect what's important to me. Yeah.
Anger gives you strength sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm saying yes in the sense of that's definitely what we do, not like that it does. Oops. Any strength?
I think it gives us a false sense of feeling better.
So it makes me feel better. Why do you think it makes us feel better?
I think we believe that it does, but in reality, it doesn't. It makes
Okay.
things worse. Yeah.
So in the sense it makes me feel better, it does make things worse, but what is that feeling like? It makes me feel better because I feel like
You're in
I've
control. You
you're
have
in.
voice, that you have some power. I mean,
Okay. Okay. Well, actually, that's another one we can put separately is that we can say it gives me control. These are great. But just going back to that, it makes me feel better. Would you say that it makes you feel, it doesn't make you feel happy actually, does it? But what way does it make you feel better? Does it make you feel like you've accomplished something, you've done something to stop your suffering? What exactly is the better
Well,
thing?
I think that as we look at all of these, it gives us that sense of feeling better. It kind of encompasses everything a little bit. It's that false sense of that I'm angry and I'm justified in my anger because I am right and it helps me overcome injustices and it gives me strength and those kind of things.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's leave it at just it makes me feel better then. Okay.
Kind of an accomplishment?
Sorry, what was that?
Some kind of an accomplishment?
So it gives me a sense of accomplishment, would you say?
Yeah, because it's a justification that, being angry, I have I have harmed somebody, but it makes me feel better. At that moment in time, I feel accomplished that I put somebody down, let somebody down.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Isn't that terrible? That's what
Yeah,
happens
it
to
is,
us.
but it feels like I have won at that moment.
Yeah, yeah. So it gives a sense of accomplishment. So it's like, I have won. Yep. Okay, Christine.
I was thinking when somebody's angry at you, and you in turn are angry at them, I would put you on equal ground or something. I don't know how you what that would be. It's like a response to them. I'm not sure how.
So it puts me on equal footing with the enemy.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah, yep, that's right. It's like it sort of links up with it gives me control, doesn't it? Because it's like when somebody has harmed you, then I've lost some control there. So I'm regaining the control by harming you back. Yep, excellent. Well, these are quite a lot of assumptions, aren't they? Anything else?
Which I think it's already been well explained and extended, but it makes me feel better because it's like a heady rush of self-righteousness. And in fact, that could be an accomplishment because maybe it's you're feeling self-righteousness as opposed to like just cowering or beating up on yourself or seeing something wrong happen and refusing to react to it. You are reacting to it and trying to improve the situation, but that can be a very distorted sense of self-righteousness at the same time.
So, but I think we can pull out something from in there that's a really good one, which is like it helps to improve the situation.
Yeah, when threatened, it's like it's power to react.
Yeah, yep. So
To help ourselves.
So we could say, well, it gives me strength. So we've got that one there, which is like the power, and it helps to improve the situation, whether it be through that, righteous anger, or in the immediate sort of harm that's being done situation. Yeah. And also, I think related to what you just said is, I think it's related, without it, I'll be vulnerable, right? So it links up with it protects me, and without it, I'll be vulnerable. Or without it, I won't be able to protect other people who I need to protect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was thinking of something going back to when you were talking about resentment. I mean, and that sometimes people will, when something goes down and they will go home and they'll ruminate on it and they'll go, well, she said that I should have said this, and then she would have said that, and then it's like reality kind of gets further and further away because every time you rework that thing, it gets further. But people get a sense of that it's not protection. It's like I'm prepared. So when she says this again, I'm going to have this mapped out in my mind so that I know exactly what I'm going to say. And they're not aware that their body's kind of going like this, and their mind's getting crazy because they're running it through over and over. And every time they run it through, they're angrier, angrier, angrier and stuff. So I don't know where that fits, but I wanted to say that when you were in the resentment, because I thought that rumination thing is just a hot mess.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yep. And the sad reality is that you can never really prepare in actual fact. And all that preparation, it's not about preparing for a positive response. It's always about preparing for a harmful response, that
Well,
rumination.
the other piece about it is what I tell people is you're not hurting them, you're hurting you. They've said F you or whatever and walked away, and they're on going shopping, and they're living rent free in your head, and you're losing your mind, and they will tell me, yes, but I feel better. And I'm like, no, you don't, because you're spending half your therapy appointment with me talking about this person that you ran into at the frozen food department. So they're still there. And it's real. I mean, that you can feel it, it's palpable.
Which is fascinating if we go to the number 11 in this list, where we think that anger gives me a sense of accomplishment. I have won. So what the person who's been mean to you, whatever it is that they said, if they had harmful intent behind what they said, their intention was to harm you. So actually what you've done is you've played entirely into their hands. And not only have they harmed you, but you've then added on to that and you've harmed yourself. So in actual fact, you haven't won, they have won. If they knew how disturbed your mind was, they'd probably be really happy if they had that harmful intent, thinking, wow, I did a really good job there. I said one sentence and look what's happened. This person spent the last week being miserable. Yeah, but we still have this sense of accomplishment, like somehow I've regained control by thinking about this for a long period of time in a negative way. Yeah.
Is that ruminating like anger fueling itself? It becomes like a forest fire and it can just get out of control, and that's one of its dangers, even though it does have its good side, I guess. But
does it have its good side? This is something we've yet to discover, the good side of anger. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to have these assumptions outlined, really investigate what are our assumptions behind anger and to check to see, are these actually accurate? Because these are very common assumptions. The idea that it protects me, the idea that I am right, the idea that it will give me power or strength to, do what I need to do. All of these things, it gives me control. We have to check, are these actually true? Or are there other ways that I can protect myself? Are there other ways that I can accomplish what I actually want to accomplish? Are there other ways that I can have strength, the strength that I need to do what's right in a situation? Are there other ways that I can actually win? Are there other ways that I can gain control? Why is it that we think that anger is the one that's going to do all of these things? Is it actually true, for starters? And if it's not true, are there other things that can do these things that we're, really wanting from anger, but which anger can't provide? So we'll leave it at that list for now. If you have any other ideas over the next week, you can jot them down, because all of the assumptions, this is why I think it's so important to make it a real personal thing, not just leave it as like this is a generalized thing, but personally for me, what are my assumptions that underlie my anger? Jot it down and then check to see, is that actually true? So with the things that we'll be talking about, you know, in the next 2 weeks, then we'll be able to see, do they actually match up or not? Okay, great. Excellent assumptions. All right. So now, just briefly, we've only got a few minutes left, but we'll just start off briefly with looking at what those 4 types of patients are. Oops, which one are you? Are you seeing the assumptions, or can you see the 4 types of patients? 4 types. Why can't I see the 4? There. Okay, now I can see the 4 types. All right. So these are the 4 types of patients that we're going to be talking about. So we've got the patients with regard to setting up a target, patients with respect to loving kindness and compassion, patients in the manner of guru-disciple, and the patients with respect to ultimate reality. In fact, each of these, we could probably talk about each of these for 4 weeks in and of itself, but we've only got 2 more weeks to go. So we'll make a sort of start on them, and then gradually you can improve your understanding through other studies that you do. So we're going to start with the second one, which is the patients with respect to loving kindness and compassion. So like I said before, as long as we can maintain the loving kindness and compassion in our own mind, then anger won't have a seat to sit on, because they're opposite ways of thinking about the one focus. So our focus is the sentient being who's harming us. Loving kindness is about goodwill, intention to benefit, whereas anger is ill will, intention to harm. So these are like absolutely fundamental. Loving kindness and compassion, absolutely fundamental to any practice of patience. I'd say probably without loving kindness and compassion, then your practice of patience will be extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. Because you need to have something else to put on the seat in your mind when you subdue and evict your anger. So in terms of this loving kindness and compassion, so stop the share there. So in terms of this loving kindness and compassion, what we really have to do is think about our own minds and what the situation is with our own minds, and then apply that to other beings. So in terms of our own mind, then our own mind is pretty unruly, right? There's like, anger comes up easily, pride comes up easily, jealousy comes up easily. What are all the other ones? Attachment comes up easily. I know attachment's a bit of a difficult word sometimes when you talk about it in the West, because we sometimes can consider positive forms of attachment. So again, it's another one of those things where we really have to identify it to understand exactly what attachment is. So all those kind of things, jealousy, pride, envy, miserliness, all of those things so easily arise within our mind because of our great familiarity with them. And because we have this great familiarity with them, then as soon as we encounter the conditions for them to arise, so there's some kind of object that we come across, then straight away they come up and they tend to overpower our minds. So we don't really stop to think about it. Like, if somebody is mean to us, if somebody is rude to us, we don't stop to think about that situation. We just because we're so familiar with anger, straight away we get angry. Or if somebody criticizes us and we have pride, so straight away the pride comes up. I'm not like that. I've got qualities better than that, right? Straight away it comes up. So thinking about our own mind, we can see how very easy it is for our own mind to become overpowered with these negative states of mind. And not only to be overpowered in the instant of it happening, but these tend to stick around in our mind for a long time as well. Really hard to subdue once they've arisen. So if our own minds are like that, it's fair to consider that other beings' minds are like that as well. We sort of operate on the assumption that other beings should excuse our own bad behavior because we we don't really have control. It's like, I didn't really mean it. I mean, you did mean it at the moment, right? It's like, just when you think about your life in a broad way and you think about what your values are. So my values are to be kind to others. My values are to be generous to others. My values are to be understanding of others. So this is how we identify ourselves as persons and as the humans we are of this life. Those are the standards that we hold ourselves to, essentially. Our afflictions, like anger, attachment, pride, jealousy, regularly don't allow us to meet those standards, right? But we still hold ourselves as being, this is my standard, this is the kind of person that I am. And so when we don't meet those standards and we do say something that's a bit nasty to somebody else, maybe we're a little bit manipulative of a situation so that it works out in our favor, that kind of a thing, then, and we might regret it and we expect understanding from others because I'm not really like that. You know, do you know what I mean? When we get angry, we say something nasty, it's like, it's not really what I'm like in actuality. It's just I made a bit of a mistake. But we don't extend the same understanding to others that we expect from others. But in reality, we are all completely the same. So we all are under the control of these afflictions. When they arise in our mind, they lock in there, and it's like they force us, essentially, to do something negative, whether it's say something negative, behave negatively in other ways, whatever it might be. This is what happens. This is the way that we exist. This is the way that everybody exists. So that's actually a reason to have loving kindness. It's not a reason to have dislike and hatred. It's not a reason for anger. Because with loving kindness, what you're doing is like with yourself, loving kindness with yourself is to wish yourself to be free from being under the control of things like anger, under the control of jealousy, right? We talked about before, what would my mind be like if I didn't have anger, if I didn't have jealousy, if I didn't have pride? We're talking about this kind of negative pride that leads you to look down on others. So surely you would want that for yourself, right? Have that wish to benefit yourself in that way. Likewise, we can extend that to others and wish others to not be under the control of their afflictions as well, so that their minds are clear, pure, clean, filled with loving kindness, filled with compassion. Does that make sense to you? I'm not saying it's easy, just like, do you understand the logic of it? This is something that requires a lot of thought, you know, because we're so entrenched in our way of thinking that there are some people who just deserve my anger. There are some people who just deserve my dislike. There are people who deserve my hatred because they're such negative people. But if those people were not controlled by their own anger, by their own pride, by their own jealousy, if those people had their own minds filled with loving kindness, with compassion, with wisdom, they'd be a completely different sort of person. So it's not the person that is the issue here. The issue here are those negative states of mind that control mind. Those are the ones that are the real enemy, not persons themselves, not people, not humans. You need to make this kind of a distinction. It's okay to want to harm, to have an intention to harm anger, whether it's in your own mind, whether it's in the mind of somebody else's. It's okay to have the intention or the wish to harm things like pride, jealousy, whether it's in your own mind or the mind of other people. Because what that wish is actually an intention to benefit. Because without those negative states of mind, the mind becomes more positive, becomes like a really, I suppose you could say it like a beautiful mind, in fact, becomes a kind mind, becomes a compassionate mind. It's not okay to have a wish to harm the person who has those states of mind. Because when you remove those states of mind, the person themselves becomes positive, The person can become positive. The mind can become positive. Do you understand the distinction between those two? It's worth thinking about, right? So think about this over the next week. All right, so shall I share with you in the chat? I'll share the list of the assumptions that we came up with anger. Just 1 second while I manage to do that. And then, so over the next week, sorry, I can't do two things at once. I'm sorry. 1 second. Okay, assumptions supporting anger. There we go. That's in the chat. Okay, so over the next week, if there are any other assumptions you come up with, you can add them to the list. But also have a think over the next week whether those assumptions are really accurate. If you can come up with any ideas or any counter logic that would prove those assumptions wrong, really analyze it. This is the whole thing with Buddhist philosophy, is you analyze fairly. You don't just accept something because it's been said by somebody. Doesn't matter who said it. Even the Buddha said, you don't accept things just because I said it or out of respect for me. You have to analyze. You have to check for yourself. So really think about this in an honest way. Think, are these assumptions correct or are they incorrect? Is there logic to support them or is there logic to disprove them? Have a think. And then have a bit of a think about what I just talked about in relation to having loving kindness, how we are all the same in being under the control of our afflictions, and that's actually a reason for loving kindness and compassion. And see what comes to mind over the week while you think about it, and we can address any questions next week. Okay, time is up, so we don't have time for any more questions this week, but if you do have any left over from this session, make sure you ask them next week. We'll definitely talk about it then. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. We'll finish off with those prayers at the end. Okay. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your contribution. It's excellent. I love contributions in class, so thank you, and your questions are great. So I will see you next week. I hope you have a good week.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.